Hey guys, James Erickson here and welcome back to Fish It First. Today's Insta tip is on the Texas rig. In this video we'll talk about the basic techniques of Texas rigging for those of you who are beginner anglers, but if you are an intermediate angler, hang out until the end. Got a couple tips for you as well. So you're new to bass angling or you're thinking about maybe getting started but you don't know where to start. The Texas rig can be an awesome option for you. It's one of the simplest rigs out there and it will absolutely catch fish. It's a fish producing machine. So let's start by talking about what materials you're going to need, and then we'll go into how to put together a Texas rig. Okay, let's talk about equipment. First, let's start with hooks. We've got two great options here. The first is a 3/0 Gamakatsu. 3/0 is the size, Gamakatsu the brand, extra wide gap hook. You can see that wide gap there. The other hook I have here is from VMC and it's an offset straight shank. You can see that straight shank. It doesn't have that extra wide gap either, and that one is also 3/0 in size. Next, after you've got your hook, you're gonna need some sort of soft plastic worm or soft creature bait. Now, the most effective soft plastic worm of all time would be the Yamamoto Senko. This is a similar soft plastic worm. This one is made by Yum. It's called the Yum Dinger. And if you're just starting out, for color choices, I would recommend green pumpkin. But for the sake of this video, there's just more contrast with white, so we're going with white. Now, really, that's all you technically need for a Texas rig. But if you want to, you can add a few other things to help you in certain situations, namely a weight. This is a bullet weight. It's lead, but you can also get them in tungsten. And you can play around with different weights. This one happens to be an 1/8 ounce. And you can just put that above your soft plastic to help it get to deeper depths or to get through more grass and weeds. And then you have the option of just letting that weight freely flow up and down the line, or you can add a peg or a bobber stop above the weight to sort of peg it in place. Let's get to rigging. Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna start with this 5-inch worm and this 3/0 Gamakatsu extra wide gap hook. Now, some worms will have this little recess cavity in it. We can talk about that later, but for right now, I want you to forget about that. I want you to take your worm, go up to the very top of the worm, take the point of your hook, drive the point of that hook down into that worm, and come out of the worm about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of the way down the worm. See that? Then take the worm and drive it up the shank. Now this part's important. Before you start to get up to the very top here, you're going to want to twist the worm in the hook 180 degrees, then bring your worm the rest of the way up the hook. Okay? Once you've done that, take your worm and your hook and line them up, just like this. Without pulling on the worm, you don't want to pull it like this. Just look at where the base of this hook right here lines up with the worm and pinch that area. That's your reference point. Now take your hook, drive it straight through the worm at your reference point, and there you have a Texas rigged worm. Now, to make it even more weedless, what you can do is take that hook point and you're just gonna what we call skin hook it. Just barely drive it into the plastic there. And now if weeds come across that, they're not gonna get to it, okay? They're not gonna get hung up on that. Now you have truly a weedless option. Obviously you wanna have your line tied to your hook first before you start doing this. Now, when that bass bites, you're gonna feel either a tugging sensation or a sudden slack in your line. And when you do, you want to reel down your slack, and then you're going to have to do a pretty hard hook set, because the idea is to push that plastic down and expose that hook to then be able to catch that bass. Now, what if you're fishing an area that is really deep, or you've got really heavy cover? You've got thick weeds, thick grass. How do you still fish the Texas rig? And the answer to that is by adding some weight. Okay, this is that bullet weight that we talked about earlier. And you can have just a weight above this. Again, you're going to want to put the weight on before you tie your line to your hook. You're going to want to have your line tied to your hook before you put your soft plastic bait on. But a weight is a great option. Now you can have that weight free flowing, where it's allowed to move any distance up and down the line, or you can add one of these little bobber stoppers or pegs and slide that down as close as you would like to the head of that bait, so it's got a little bit of movement if you like, or slide it down all the way and it's locked in place and that weight's not moving up or down. So now that you know how to put together a Texas rig, where do you throw this thing? Well, some of the best places if you're just starting out, that'll give you a high percentage chance of catching a bass. Underneath docks, especially on bright sunny days, can be a great spot. Bass don't have eyelids. They don't like the bright sun. They're going to use those docks for some shade and some cover. So that can be a great option, especially in the middle of a bright, hot, sunny day. And other places where you can throw this would be in thick cover, right? So heavy weeds, heavy grass, lily pad areas, really, really thick, heavy cover areas. But if you do that, make sure you're skin hooking it like that so that you've got that weedless option for the Texas rig. And in thick grass, thick weeds, you're probably going to want weight to be able to punch down through that. Okay, so those of you that are intermediate anglers, here's the couple tips that I have for you. When you are rigging your Texas rigs, it can be very easy to turn this worm up at the head once we get up here to start twisting it. I don't recommend that. What can happen is if you twist up here, you've got a lot greater area that can sort of push and make that tunnel or that cannula within the worm larger, which gives it a greater risk of slipping. So what I like to do is once you've got it rigged on here, actually make that turn when it's on the more straight part of the shank of the hook. So make that turn here, then pull it up over the top, and then finish off your rig from there. Okay, tip number 2. For those of you who are throwing the weightless Texas rig, I got a recommendation. Throw a little bit heavier hook. I'm not talking about a larger size here. You can still use 3/0, 4/0, 5/0, whichever you prefer. But what I'm talking about is something that's a little bit heavier and a little bit thicker. For example, this is the Gamakatsu 3/0 EWG hook. But if you look in stores, they'll have a Gamakatsu hook just like this. It's got a little sticker on the bottom that says Superline right here. That Superline hook is going to have a larger diameter. It's going to be a little bit beefier, a little heavier. VMC's straight shank offset worm hook, their version that's a little beefier, I believe is called Heavy Duty. But either way, you want to throw a little bit heavier hook on there. The reason for that is that you're still getting the advantages of the motion and the presentation of that Texas rig soft plastic weightless. You're still getting that same benefit, but it gives you just enough weight to where you're able to more accurately make that cast to exactly where you want that presentation to be. So that's tip number 2, throw a little bit heavier weight hook. Hey guys, so that's it. Thank you so much for joining us here on Fish It First, and happy Texas rig fishing to you. I hope it produces a lot of bass for you. Look in August for us to be doing reviews on some of the newest, latest, and greatest fishing gear. And until next time, see you later.